thank you very much to all of you for joining. Thanks so much to the Condit for organising this event, Fair Future for All, on an extremely important day. We knew that this was going to be an important day more generally, that this was when the new Borders Bill was going to be published. And we also knew, of course, that this is the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of the Refugee Convention is coming up in just a few weeks' time, later this month. As it happens, actually, the bill was actually published today, and many of you will have seen some of the publicity around that, both trailed actively by the government in different ways in recent days and then actually published today. So I look forward to a really important and energizing conversation for the next 60 minutes, including with participation of all of you. We have a wonderful panel. We will be starting with Sabia, Zaza, the Chief Executive of Scottish Refugee Council. We will be hearing from Anna Jones, the co-founder of RefuAid, and Kolbasia Ausu, who's the co-founder of Survivors Speak Out and the senior director of Survivor Empowerment at Freedom from Torture. We will also have a short video from an Afghan-born NHS consultant, Wahid Aryan, talking about what this bill would mean for human future. So looking forward to that very much. Starting then with Sabia Zaza, Chief Executive of Scottish Refugee Council. As I said, from 2014, he led the Coventry Refugee and Migrant Centre, which had helped him in the past when he had arrived there, did lots of other work in Coventry, a wealth of knowledge in the refugee integration with both his personal experiences, but also all of his policy and research work, and multiply decorated in many different ways. I really look forward to hearing from you, Sabia, how you see how these things fit together. The bill that's being published today, the Refugee Convention, which we signed up for 70 years ago. Where are we, would you say? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a privilege and an honor to be with colleagues on this panel, but also with others who are joining us today. It is an important day, as you said, in a number of sense. One, for instance, we should be celebrating the Refugee Convention, but on the other hand, sadly, we have got a bill that is being run through the Parliament, which is more or less having a go at vulnerable people that convention is giving some form of protection. So just to step back a bit, after the atrocities of the Second World War, nations and states got together and in July, actually, July 1951, to sign the Refugee Convention. And this didn't just come about from somewhere. The Refugee Convention builds on Article 14 of the 1948 Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the right of people to seek asylum from persecution in other countries. So if I speak about the convention as a former refugee, at times this is the only symbol of hope for people fleeing war, persecution, and human rights violations. There's nothing else, and even that is not easily accessed by people. So you become internally displaced, you end up in refugee camps, you hope for a better, more peaceful return to your home. That doesn't materialize, and then you carry on and you try to find safety elsewhere. The same happened with me and many others. We were internally displaced for 10 years. I still remember vividly as a young man, when we first became internally displaced, we ended up in a refugee camp in a desert in a city called Jalalabad in Afghanistan. And at the first, I had a bit of a sense of excitement as a young man, because I saw the opportunity of living in a tent. But after a few days, I realized that it wasn't a camping holiday in any sense, because there was no medicine, there was no healthcare, there was no education, and there was just heat and death, and it was a terrible situation. Refugee camps are not longer-term solutions. All nations have to play their equal part to give people protection, and that's why the Refugee Convention is there. I think that is one aspect of the convention. The other is also, I think we need to really highlight, and sadly today has undermined that, is that the convention has also made significant contributions to the nations that have welcomed refugees. So after the Second World War, when this convention was signed, people arrived from all sorts of conflicts to rebuild their lives in the UK and other parts of Europe. And they worked in our industries, they made contributions. Today, their second generation is our lawyers, they're our GPs, they're our accountants. And ironically, somehow, they are our home secretaries as well, who are denying others the right to seek asylum. And that contribution is because we have opened our doors to people fleeing persecution. And I think that journey continues. My children will contribute, I contribute, and people who arrived at the same time as I did, all of them are also contributing. I can hardly think of anyone who would say they do not want to work or contribute, or they want to be on some form of benefits. Everyone arrives with a dream, with hope and aspirations to rebuild their lives, but also make a vital contribution to their new home. So today's legislation and the bill more or less is shutting the door on those people who are trying to seek protection here. I think I cannot define it any better, but for me personally, as a proud UK citizen, I think today is a national day of embarrassment, because we are trying to detach ourselves from this convention. But at the same time, people who are fleeing imprisonment, people who are fleeing persecution, we're trying to imprison them through this bill. And that shows that there is not much difference between this bill and what it is aiming to introduce and what people are fleeing. So it's a two-tier system, or potentially a three-tier system, and it is putting people, very vulnerable people who may not have access to the government complementary pathways of resettlement or other forms of safe routes that the UK or other states offer, but a very small number of very vulnerable people who will not have access to any other routes, and this bill is more or less criminalizing them. And I think I've personally defined this as vandalism of our values, as vandalism of our long-standing tradition of welcome and hospitality, and offering people sanctuary and protection. What I see this bill as, looking at it from Scotland as well, is that it doesn't speak to the proud local values of our devolved nations. It doesn't speak to our communities. It doesn't speak to the hundreds of city of sanctuary groups that we have across the UK, the churches, the GP practices, the theatres of sanctuary and others. And particularly in Scotland, it is cutting through the New Scots Refugee Integration Strategy, which has got clear ambitions around integration from day one, and a rights-based approach for people, irrespective of what their status is. So this bill will cut through that. And why the government is doing this is not because they're doing it to work for the UK or for people seeking protection. This is a manifestation of the UK government's commitment to pursuing its hostile environment policy, nothing else. This bill is not based on any sound analysis. It's not based on any moral or logical analysis. It's very much feeding the right wing. And it has started from Brexit with the settled status, and now the having a go at a small number of people seeking protection. And I think if we don't stop this, if we don't oppose it, we don't know what what will be next, because this is part of a structured culture war, and having a go at a small minority of people who have got no voice and who are in search of our protection. So I don't see it as anything else, because if it was, the government would have spoken with us, they would have engaged with us, they would have taken our vision for a more humane, effective and compassionate asylum system more seriously. Sadly, that did not happen. But what we're trying to do is we're not giving hope. We're just like refugees. We fall down, we get up, we dust off and carry on again. So we have Together with Refugees a campaign, and I'd encourage colleagues to join that. So the hashtag for that is Together with Refugees and who we are, because when we are together with refugees, that's who we are. And I think we have currently got about 250 or over organizations and individuals signed up. So this is about us. This is not just about people seeking protection. This is about our long-term future. This is about the kind of Britain and the UK we want to live in. And it's very, very important that we oppose this bill. We've not always shouted about it. We've always, with colleagues through the Asylum Reform Initiative, Freedom from Torture, Refugee Council, British Red Cross, and many others, we've worked together to give the UK government and the Home Office a very clear alternative that would work for the UK, but also work for people seeking protection here. We want humanity in the asylum system. We want the UK Home Office to cut down its processing time and also give people the right to work. Because if we really want this system to be effective or efficient, there are many efficiencies. Majority of the expenditure and expenses within the asylum system is currently on enforcement. So what is being introduced today is not far off from what is already being done. So in terms of, like, for example, speed up removals, we've never slowed down removals or sentences for people smugglers. People smugglers are always sentenced, and empower border force. I think what is in there is quite a bit of cruelty, and I think that is what is worrying for us, because ultimately the UK should, as a major player, and also as a state involved in some of these conflicts around the world as well, should be more welcoming and open and understanding of people fleeing persecution. And a clear example is Afghanistan. I know I'm from Afghanistan, I've got a conflict of interest there, I don't want to dwell on that too much, but the international communities fleeing Afghanistan, whilst the UK will be shutting the door on people who've worked with the international community to bring peace, prosperity, and stability to Afghanistan and stand up for women's rights. So it's somehow contrary to what we're doing globally. We're also introducing some substantial international aid cuts. So people will be fleeing for reasons of poverty, for reasons of environmental issues and global conflict. So we need to be more open. And I think the pandemic should have been enough to remind us that we need to work together. And unless we are all safe, we cannot, unless everyone is safe, we cannot all be safe. So I think we need to learn more from that. So what I'm trying to wrap up with is that we're not external to this system. Those of us in Asylum Reform Initiative and others, we are an early warning system and a vanguard to the system. We don't want another Windrush to happen. We don't want the UK to look bad. We want our values and traditions, but also the convention, which I said is the only symbol of hope, to be nurtured and not deleted altogether. We need to make sure that the only symbol of hope that is there for people seeking protection at this time is nurtured and invested in. And we don't want a plan or a bill that is only based on feeding the far right. It needs to be well structured, analyzed, and also well assessed, and it needs to be in line with our principles. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sabia, for that really powerful start with lots for us to think about for sure. You referred to the coalition that's been created of hundreds of organizations together with refugees. And what I referred to briefly in the introduction, we have a video which I think that we're able to play now from Wahid Aryan, an NHS-born doctor who himself was honored by Priti Patel as a global hero, but describes why he is so unsettled by this bill that's upcoming. So let's see if we can watch that quickly now.
Hi, my name is Dr. Wahid Aryan. I'm a doctor in the NHS. I have this urgent message for you, the British people. I'm very proud to have been working shoulder to shoulder with my NHS colleagues serving people against COVID-19 on the front line. But this would not have been possible under the government's new plan for immigration. Let me tell you why. I was not born in the UK. I was born in war-torn Afghanistan. I spent my entire childhood hiding from the daily rockets, bombs and shellings in cellars and in refugee camps. Age 15, I had to leave my family and everything behind to come to the UK to seek asylum. I brought nothing with me except a hope for, and I'm very honoured and humbled that my work has also been recognised by the British government. But under the government's new plan for immigration, this would not have been possible. I have received tremendous compassion and kindness from the British people, but there are many others like me with their own hopes and dreams who are also in need of safety and your kindness. On World Refugee Day, I am calling on the government to rethink their plan for immigration, and I'm calling on you to stand with me in spreading this message wide. Thank you.
So I think a really powerful message there from Wahid, who's talked a lot about these things, and I think is so important to listen to. He is absolutely not an isolated case, as we'll hear in a moment from our next speaker, Anna Jones, in terms of people, what they come and what Sabia has already addressed, come and bring to the NHS, and yet somehow are being demonized in their arrival. So Anna Jones, really glad to have Anna with us, co-founder of RefuAid, founded in 2015, following the appalling scenes, Alan Kurdi down by on the beach, and all that came from that, of people waking up to some of the horror, and was having the idea of practical help at its core from the start, and in response to the barriers facing those who sought asylum and living independent and fulfilling lives in the UK. I will leave Anna to talk a little bit more about kind of what her organization does, but also putting that then into the context of what we are seeing again with the bill today and what that would mean for the people that RefuAid is able to help. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you very much to the Conduit for having us and having this very important event this evening. I think this bill comes at a time when, you know, displacement levels around the world are at their highest and will continue to grow in the coming years. We're seeing conflicts that last for longer and longer. Climate change is creating more displacement and more conflict. And this bill is a UK bill, but it plugs into quite a scary international rhetoric around displacement and asylum. RefuAid, as Steve said, started in 2015. We two founders who had no background working in this space. We were volunteering in Lesbos and went over there on a voluntary trip with doctors and nurses from the UK to provide health services for those arriving, and was struck by the conversations that we had with nearly every single person who was just looking for somewhere to live safely and peacefully, be able to put their children into education and be able to work and provide for their families. As any person, if you ask, you know, what their priorities are, it resoundingly is, as a human being, quite often those things. And so within the UK, we were horrified when we started to support asylum seekers and refugees in our local community in getting, resettling and starting their lives in the UK. And we were horrified to find how difficult it was for people to learn English, recognize their skills, and return to work. So that's what the organisation now focuses on. We provide English language tuition that's full-time intensive to individuals who've sought asylum in the UK and are looking to either return to work or go on to university. We support around 350 people on our language programme at any one time, and it's a pretty even 50-50 split between students and professionals. And following our language support, either our students will then hopefully receive an offer from university and access to student finance and go on to study, or a scholarship if they're asylum seekers. And for professionals that we support, we then provide finance in the form of an interest-free loan to cover their UK accreditation costs. So if you're a doctor or a dentist or a lorry driver, and you arrive in the UK and you're looking to return to work, you will have to re-accredit your qualifications in order to gain employment. And that costs a lot of money, so thousands of pounds. With no credit history in the UK, those with refugee status are shut out of mainstream lending, and so the loan plugs that gap. We've lent since 2017 over £1 million, and prior to COVID we had 100% repayment rate. We're now running at 98.6% repayment rate. Those defaults have been due to lockdown. But I think the bill today is terrifying for us. So when we look through our data, over the last 3 years, we've supported 700 people into employment or into higher education. 87% of those are what the Home Secretary would consider irregular arrivals, which means they've arrived here either using documents to get to safety, with a people smuggler in the majority of cases, or any other way that's not on the government resettlement programme. I think it's super important to remember in context of this conversation that the government resettlement programme is at an all-time low. We're not seeing a pledge to increase these numbers, and we're not seeing practical solutions for how these resettlement programmes would work. I've just read a really good article about how, it's so hypothetical when notions of resettlement are being discussed. They're being talked about in hypothetical camps that at the moment with structures and processes in place that don't exist. So that's terrifying. I want to caveat what I'm going to go on to say about RefuAid's clients with: we strongly don't believe that asylum and profession and employment should be too intrinsically linked when we start to talk about human rights. Yes, it's incredible that the wealth of experience and qualifications that many people seeking asylum bring to the UK, but asylum is fundamentally a human right, no matter what your profession or skills or qualities that you have to bring as a human being. You have that right to claim asylum, and it should be under international law honoured. But going on from that, what RefuAid have seen, and with the demographic of people that we work with, a huge proportion of those arriving in the UK are qualified professionals with incredible experience that only benefits the UK. So in the last 3 years, we've supported 227 doctors, over 30 nurses, and many other healthcare professions, including dentistry, X-ray technicians, radiographers, back into work. And those numbers have been, what have been irregular arrivals who've been able to claim asylum and successfully win. Under this bill today, they would not have had that opportunity. Even if they are to claim asylum, as I understand it, in the process that will be founded, they will only be given that temporary protection. And what that temporary protection means, it will need to be renewed, and the mental health implications that we would see then would make it very difficult for people to maintain employment for a long time, but also for employers to offer work over a long time. Practically, we are already facing huge barriers working with even large employers such as the NHS, explaining gaps on CVs. There are also already huge hurdles for those who've successfully claimed asylum in the UK, who've been through a horrific, asylum process, then have a successful claim. They already have huge barriers to face in getting into work. the temporary protection that this bill would put in would essentially make it almost impossible for people to contribute, even though resoundingly that is what people want to do once they've claimed asylum in the UK. And so I think for that reason, it's terrifying. I think it speaks to, and as Sabia mentioned really brilliantly in his talk, it speaks to a scary rhetoric that this bill is practically very difficult. I can't see how a lot of it will be enforced. What it looks like to me is that there's going to be a huge amount of litigation. There's going to be a huge amount of toing and froing between the Home Office and lawyers. And all this means for those we support is that they are just stuck in limbo for a longer period, forced further into destitution and exploitation. And that is what we see in the UK. Without rights to work, those extremely vulnerable people who have already been through so much and are here claiming asylum are preyed upon by the very worst of society. There are cases of bonded slavery. There is further trafficking within the UK. There is huge amounts of exploitation. And all we are doing with this bill is making people far more vulnerable and far more unable to rebuild their lives. And that for us is terrifying. But I think what it's the purpose behind it and what's kind of fueled it is this misunderstanding within the UK of the word refugee, what it is, the legal status that comes with it, who is a refugee. And I think there's been a huge polarization in these conversations that has been fueled by Brexit, that without, if you are just to solely read certain media outlets, your perception and understanding of someone who seeks asylum on our shores is incorrect and inaccurate. And there needs to be a wider education piece with wider society about legal human rights, but also who is arriving and how they, as we've seen, provide amazing contributions to the UK. I mean, for us, when COVID broke out at the beginning of last year, we had 541 doctors, not all with work rights, not all who had re-accredited, some who had, many who hadn't, some who had their English qualifications, some who hadn't. 541 people who came forward and wanted to volunteer. They did not want to work. They wanted to put their medical skills to use to support the British public and do whatever they could and put themselves at massive amount of risk for a country that, for many of whom, had subjected them to an awful ordeal going through our asylum process. And so I think there needs to be a wider education piece within society around the asylum process and around our legal obligations, which this bill violates. So yes, I'll leave it there and we'll look forward to any questions.
Thanks very much. Exactly, just echoing what Anna just said. Thanks so much for that, Anna. And echoing what Anna just said, looking forward to the questions. You can put them into the Q&A already or continue now. But we will move to our next speaker. Honoured to introduce my friend and colleague Sabia, who began his career campaigning advocating when he co-founded Survivor Speak Out Network, a network led by survivors campaigning for survivors more than a decade ago. He works now at Freedom from Torture. He's led the survivor activism work within Freedom from Torture over a number of years. In 2020, he was recognised for his significant contribution to the UK-led Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, advocating for the rights of survivors and others, and was appointed an OBE. And then this year, as a recognition of the centrality of the importance of survivor lived experience being so important for all kind of advocacy work, really, he has been appointed to a newly created role of the Senior Director for Survivor Empowerment, and is now also involved with a group of different lived experience groups, a coalition of different lived experience groups, One Strong Voice, which is also campaigning strongly on this bill. Sabia, look forward to hearing your perspectives on all of the things that we're hearing about now, conscious, as I know you will be, that time is ticking by very, very fast, and I definitely want to give time to hear from the audience and for questions. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. It is my honor and also privilege to be here today, and also thank you for the conduit for organizing this conversation. I think I will start, as Sabia said, that there is nothing else that gives us hope and also right to seek protection somewhere else as a refugee convention. And then, you have the interpretation and also implementation of that refugee convention by anybody, by everyone else. And I'd like to say that I am really a proud refugee. It's not just because I have been given protection. No, absolutely not. But it's the fact that no matter what the system put as an obstacle, I managed to overcome it. And that's the thing that quite a lot of refugees and asylum seekers, have to do that. And also something that is inherent into most everybody or every person seeking protection. There is, I think, again, Sabira also touched on that, and I want to emphasize that there is no deterrent big enough when the survival instinct, is driving you to save your life. And the refugees and asylum system give equal opportunity to people when, they're seeking protection. Absolutely not. From my case, and I would say that I was judged a liar before even I opened my mouth. And the question that I constantly ask myself, why migrants are always the easy target, the one at fault, the cause of instability, unemployment, shortage of housing, or shortage of a bed in hospital, or shortage of school places. And there is something fundamentally wrong with the migration narrative, I guess. Are migrants so much of a low-level human being that their life does not matter at all? I could say that when Priti Patel was writing this new immigration plan, she would say, reject or push them back at all costs. I can hear you loudly shouting that certainly, that's one of the motives of her pushing for that. So what is our responses? What is your responses? What about your mate? What about your neighbors? What about your MPs that you have helped to elect? Do you know what they're thinking about it? Should he or she not represent you? Did you tell them about your opposition to this matter? I think we Brit want to proudly say that we are the best, the most compassionate, the more welcoming of all nations, even the one we have not conquered. We have stood up to Hitler and his demonic agenda, one might say. We have given the world Magna Carta and influenced the Refugee Convention. We are small but mighty, and our economy can testify to that. I mean, that's great. But what do we think about protection, about our immigration asylum system? I mean, let me tell you what we think at One Strong Voice. And who's One Strong Voice? I think One Strong Voice, for now, we are just a small network of leaders who've lived experience of immigration and asylum seeker. But trust me, in few years, we're going to be very mighty and very soon. But here, what do we believe of our vision of a welcoming Britain? One, that we believe that a system that ensures that people are able to access refugee protection no matter how they travel, whether that you travel by camel, whether that in plane, whether that through visa or not, you have that. I mean, just quickly touch on that. The government want to take away protection from people that are forced to make dangerous journey to reach the UK. While it is preferable for people to take safe route, but we know it is not just possible for most people to do so. Everybody should be able to apply for refugee status no matter the route to safety. Two is to create an independent asylum decision-making system equipped to make the right decision first time. And then that would, that will help even the economy. Three, create an accountable asylum decision-making system free of political interference and equipped to make the best decision first time. Fourth, end immigration detention once and for all. Nobody should be detained for immigration purposes everybody should be treated in a safe, dignified, and humane way all time. And we understand that not everybody will be recognized as having a right to remain, but we need a system that respects everybody's humanity. I mean, 5, house people seeking asylum in a community so that we can rebuild our life. 6, create a new refugee integration strategy that starts from the day 1 of arrival and ensure that local community thrive. 6, I think this is a bit of, controversial, but I think currently there is 80 million people were displaced around the world in 2020. And we know that UK has promised, in 2005, that to resettle 5,000 people every year, right? That's 20,000 for the next 5 years. I think we ask that at least this number for 5 years, we can do it in 1 year because we know how to do it. We've done it. So instead of doing 5, we can do 20,000 a year. 8, and my last point is that to enhance refugee family reunion so that family unity is preserved. And that is the thing that we've been discussing in One Strong Voice, so that we think that if those put in place, we can create a welcoming Britain for all that bring into consideration our compassion, our kindness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gobasi, including thanks so much for reminding us of things that we can do, not just things that we are protesting against, but things that we can do. I want to open it up for questions, really eager to hear. There's, the questions is already open. I see there's so much already coming in. I think that we are joined also, and so pleased for that, by a representative from the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. I think we have on the line, or in the room, as it were, Larry Botinick, legal advisor there. And if that's true, yes, we do. This is great. Larry, it would be wonderful to hear your perspective and the UNHCR's perspective, UN Refugee Agency's perspective. UNHCR, for those who have not been aware, but some of you may have seen the headlines, has been quite sharply critical of the bill, more critical, it seems to me. UN agencies often have to be very careful about what they say, and they always are careful. But it was interesting to hear the voice, and it's the refugee agency that really holds, if you like, what the importance of the convention is as well. So, Larry, happy to take a question from you, but also, to be honest, because the UNHCR has such an important role, for you to say just a couple of words, very, very briefly, on how you see both the bill and the conversation we just heard so far. Quite briefly. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. I hope you can hear me. First, just appreciation for the presentations. They closely align with UNHCR's views. I'm not sure if I'm encouraged that we got it right or discouraged that we got it right and our concerns are valid. I liked Sabia laying out and tying it to the anniversary of the Refugee Convention, because we like to take a global view on these things. If everyone should stay in France, there's no reason why France shouldn't point to Germany, and then Germany to Greece. And then you end up with all the Syrians in Turkey and Lebanon, and all the Afghans in Pakistan and Iran. The UK is at the end of a terminus, so they already get off lightly, including in the past year. The numbers over the channel may have gone up, but the numbers overall have gone down. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, if Denmark and the UK and other prosperous states don't take their share, really, why should anyone else? And if we don't think that the international system can break down, we can speak to Spain, who just had people swimming across from Morocco, and Poland, who just had people forced over from Belarus. I guess I'll be quick so other people can ask questions, but I liked Anna and Kobasia raise the issue of minimal resettlement. The bill is based, it seems to me, on stopping people from jumping the queue. Since we're part of the resettlement process, I can confirm there is no queue. There's no list that people can put their name on and that we work through. 5,000 a year in resettlement is appreciated. We're grateful for that. But if we're speaking of it as the sum total, I'm not sure anyone would say that that's responsibility sharing. Let me end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Larry. Great to hear from you. And thanks as before that the UN has been so strong in its voice, which given the authority that you and your organization carry, that's really important. So throwing up more generally, so I see a question from Andrew saying the UK left the European Union and its influence in world politics and business will dwindle. Some businesses are moving their investments from UK to other EU countries. What plans, he asks, does the UK have to insulate herself from the deluge of refugees from war-torn countries in the light of Brexit? I'm not quite sure that some of you would actually take the framing of that in quite the same way, but I wonder if I could ask one of you to respond to that. Sabia, would you be happy to take a shot at answering that? In other words, the link between Brexit on the one hand, economic difficulties, and what the question describes as a quote unquote deluge of refugees.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Steve. That's an important question, and I did put a reply there on chat as well. So we did hope that refugees or refugee protection could play a significant part in a post-Brexit UK, given the resilience, hope, and resourcefulness and innovation that refugees bring with them. Because when Brexit was actually happening, the sort of language that we could hear from our leaders was a more global Britain and cause for good and cause for innovation and so on and all those things. But none of those could materialize if we cannot be cause for good if we are shutting the door on some of the most vulnerable people. We cannot be a global Britain if we're not taking responsibility for people displaced by war, by climate change, by poverty. So this is I think in terms of refugees from war or other situations, I think this is the UK more or less shunting that responsibility to others. So people coming through first safe country and so on. None of those things seeking protection in a first safe country exist in Refugee Convention or in human rights articles. These are the sort of, sadly, we are in a situation where our leaders are playing or dancing to the tune of the far right, who sort of like this, the same kind of language that comes from far right is somehow interpreted and put to our parliamentarians in bills and plans on immigration, and I think it's contrary to all these major ambitions that our politicians were selling to the UK, that after Brexit, after free movement and so on, will be global Britain, will be cause for good and so on. So I think in a sense, yes, refugees could be a very good population injection, but otherwise as well, people bring skills. I arrived with 7 years of education, but arrived with a dream, and so did Kolbasia and others. We all came with something. It's not only that people arrived with their belongings, people do bring their hopes, their aspirations, and their dream to rebuild their lives and make a contribution. Everyone wants to have a dignified income, and I think that way, that kind of like bringing the community. I've spoken at a number of schools in the past to school children and the Syrian refugees arriving through resettlement and their kids, and how much head teachers and teachers would tell me that the resilience that these kids are bringing and the innovation and the approach they're bringing, they're renewing their school's dynamics and their classroom dynamics, because none of their kids have experienced war. But when these kids tell them stories of surviving in war, not having books, not being able to go to school, it has changed the dynamics of our education and schools. So I think there's quite a lot of contributions that I don't want to list all of those here, but I think bringing people from those conflicts, giving them that protection, treating them equally is good for all of us. Whilst we give people that roof above their head, it's good for our future generations as well, because it makes us that resilient and stronger community.
I was just also, Steve, if I could just add in there from Sabia's point, I think as well, like Sabia's saying, there was talk of this open Britain and global Britain that was going to come out from Brexit. This bill is coming at a time where not only have we introduced this bill, we're also cutting foreign aid to low levels that haven't been seen since following the Second World War. And that's something that's even being met from resistance within the Tory party itself, yet it's still being pushed through, and it's still, you know, this desperation to fulfill this far right's rhetoric. And so I think it plugs into a wider rhetoric around, we are not becoming this global Britain. We are shrinking ourselves away. We are cutting ourselves off. We are cutting off the support that many around the world rely on to survive. And that is only going to have negative implications for others, but also domestically. As Kolbasi said, I think one of the realizations that it's hard to communicate to the public without either living or particularly or additionally witnessing is that it doesn't matter what we put pen to paper and say people can and can't do. Nothing is going to stop people fleeing the atrocities that they are fleeing, because they are atrocities. And so I think that needs to come through, you know, as well, when we think about this global open Britain within the conversation.
And I see some answers are coming in there and some other questions. We're definitely running out of time very fast, but a really important question is there, which I indeed was going to flag for you as the panelists if it didn't come up. So John is asking, I was wondering what panelists think that the government should be doing about channel boat crossings. 73% of the public think this is a serious problem, and 49%, so almost half of Labour voters, this is not just about the far right, he says. The perception of uncontrolled borders is a major driver of the current bill, which, so I'm unable to read it properly, I beg your pardon, but you guys can perhaps see it as well. Apologies that I can't see the end of that sentence, but I think that that already gives you a sense of how we're going to be able to address those things. Can I have Sabia putting a hand? Okay, very good. I was going to go to the other two, but I'm very happy actually. Give us a brief answer, Sabia, and then I want to toss it to the other two as well, because this is a really central thing. The narrative is all about that as being the problem on the table. And it's clear that if anyone is unhappy with this bill, there needs to be a way of understanding that perhaps this is not the end. Sabia, you go first.
Very brief. All of us are concerned about the dangerous journeys that people are taking, crossing the channel. And that is a worry for us as well. People put their lives at risk to get to safety. The solution for that is to expand and continue the resettlement program. So we've got people that could arrive through resettlement, and that resettlement is open to all communities, because so far the people that have arrived through the resettlement program for all valid reason are people from the Syrian conflict. So somebody who's, let's say, worked with the international community in Afghanistan or Eritrea or somewhere else, and trying to seek protection, they don't have access to this resettlement. So expanding the resettlement program, decreasing the arbitrary rules of family reunification. So you have to be earning £18,600 and you need to have a nice house, well insulated, and you should have all these sort of all singing and dancing, all these papers and documents before you can invite your own loved one or a family member or spouse. So family reunion rules need to be relaxed a bit. And also, I think, people should be given the right to seek. The UK doesn't have an asylum visa, so the only way to seek protection here is to arrive on our shores. So there needs to be some kind of like a humanitarian protection visa system, so that if somebody's life is genuinely at risk, then they can go somewhere to seek protection. And this is not me just speaking in a way. I've got people from the Afghan government or people working in Afghanistan been contacting me constantly to say, my life and the life of my children is at risk. Here's a letter from the Taliban. And as soon as they take over, I'll be the first person. Where can I go? There's nowhere for them to go. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Shall I jump in? I think
jump in quickly, and then I do want, there's a really important
my points were going to be that there needs to be safe and legal routes for those seeking asylum, and then additionally we need to understand that these numbers aren't that high, and that's the point. There is not a wealth of people arriving via the channel as is perceived in some media outlets. There have always been people arriving via the channel, and it is an awful way to arrive, and we must support people, but they are not as high as Priti Patel would have people think, and there needs to be wider education around that. There is also no evidence that her hostile environment policy, that turning the boats back, criminalizing the RNLI, that any of this actually works. They've been doing it for 10 years now, and it doesn't work. It's not a policy that works. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed with voters.
Perceptions are so important in so much of this. And another really important question comes in on Australia, which has been a model which, as we know, the British government's been looking to. I come from Australia and was very embarrassed and shocked to read that our offshore detention centre approach was considered, in other words, shipping off to Nauru, for example, was considered an inspiration to the UK in changing their policy. It seems to come back to the same old rhetoric worldwide, that refugees drain resources and don't contribute to the economy. So the question to the panel, how do you see that rhetoric changing, both in the general public and in the political sphere? Kobasia, do you want to, you have thoughts on this? I'm happy to throw it to others as well, but the problem of how to confront that pretty toxic rhetoric of what's happening there.
Yeah, I think it is a quite massive dilemma, and also I think it is the same dilemma, the question from John as well, about the border control. I think it looks like the United Kingdom have two phases. One phase is they want to present the entire world that they're a global force for change and for positivities. That's when at the length of the arm, and when it's close to home, so there is completely different phase. It is the same government, and I have two different political. I'm going to touch on why I'm saying that. One political in terms of the immigration, and one political in terms of holding people accountable, to the action that is at the cause of people, migrating in the first place. One hand, we have the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative doing everything and bringing people to court, being people that, at the cause to justice. And on the other hand, when the same survivors, coming here seeking protection, so absolutely, is no. I think the one or two things that we need to do is to change the narrative, because for the last few years, the government have the step ahead in terms of the narrative. The government dictating the narrative. The government using the same terminology that we used to use in a sector and turn it around using the same narrative. And I think there is two type of group of people that need to push forth. One is the people who lived the experience, and secondly is everybody else. Because if communities, or I don't want to use the example, but this example of the things that happen in Glasgow, when National took to the street, said that no, that's not going to be in our name. And if we come to that point, whatever the government putting, whatever the statistics going to tell us, if the National say that absolutely not, we are a welcoming people, we are compassionate people, and that's how we're going to have our door or our policy and our immigration need to reflect that, no matter what, nothing can break that. but it is on us as an individual, you know, to make those, you know, changing happen, to tell the government that here is not Australia, and we cannot and we will not support anything that close to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gobasia, for that. We're out of time. Time always goes too fast, but thank you so much for this. Thank you to the Conduct Club again for hosting. Thank you to audience for joining us. And if we were able to, I'd ask you to put your hands together, as it were, for our brilliant panel. And thank you very much indeed to all of them. And for those of you in the audience, those who are interested, so you've heard reference here, the Together with Refugees Coalition exists, easily findable with all the details of what's going on, let alone all the many, many, many organizations, including those represented here, but much more beyond that. We're all looking at these issues, and there will certainly be a lot more to come. So thank you to all of you for joining, and we look forward to a full reopening more generally. Thank you.